Good to see you. Did you have a good afternoon? Glad you're here. Can't do this without a pen. All right. Talking about God's Word and feminism. Is the Bible unfair to women? Some feminist groups say so. But before we get to that, earlier this week, for those of you that follow the news, and especially like the political news, you may have noticed that the President was at a prayer breakfast in Washington, D.C., which is not unusual. But he made some remarks, and they themselves are not unusual either. I don't think it's anything new or different from what has been said before. But for some reason, it's got a lot of press this week, and they are remarks that seem to be persistent. And so I think it's, we've talked about them in here, but I wanted to take a minute or two and just kind of run through this whole line of thinking one more time to make sure that you're informed, particularly if you haven't heard me talk about it or someone else. What the President did in his speech in the prayer breakfast is make a comparison between Christians and Muslims. And the way that it goes is you compare Christians from almost 1,000 years ago in the Crusades in Europe with Muslims of today. And the point of making that comparison is to say, see, everyone has examples of violence in their belief system. And so we should not be arrogant. We shouldn't think that we're right and they're wrong. We should be humble in our thinking about Islam. Well, I think humility is great, and I don't have a problem with that. Owning up to the mistakes that we've made in the past is okay. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think any of us would. But the way this comparison is made is got some serious flaws in it. And that's what I would just like to point out to you in case you're unaware of it, and so that you're informed and perhaps can help other people be informed if it comes up. So the idea here is to do something that's called moral equivalency, just to give it a term. Moral equivalency, which essentially is saying that really morally Christianity is not any better than Islam. That the two are the same. They're equal in terms of morality. Now we're also told that the terrorists of today do not represent true Islam. Oh, well, those aren't true Muslims, we're told. They have hijacked a peaceful religion, Islam. And so we should not judge Islam based on the acts of a few. Well, maybe the word few isn't working so well anymore, but relatively speaking, maybe a few. Then on the other side, we're told that the acts of Crusaders who lived 1,000 years ago do represent Christianity. There's the first part of the comparison that I have a hard time with. If violent Muslims of today don't represent true Islam, then why are we talking about Crusaders of 1,000 years ago? If violent Muslims of today don't represent Islam, then violent Crusaders of 1,000 years ago don't represent Christianity. That's really the only fair way to look at this, but that's not the way the comparison is made. Also, we are asked to compare peaceful Muslims with brutal Christians. We're supposed to keep our focus on the peaceful Muslims and not look at the brutal Muslims. Whereas when we look at Christianity, we're only supposed to focus in on those who are violent and not think about the vast majority who are peaceful. You've got Sunnis and Shias fighting each other, constantly blowing each other up. disagreements with the Methodists, but we haven't started blowing them up yet, okay? Not even the Latter-day Saints. We just don't do that. Again, I understand what the President and others are trying to do, but I think we need to tell the rest of the story, too, to be fair. No Baptists have flown planes into buildings yet that I know of. Not even planning to do so that I know of. I think if we have to go back 1,000 years to find Christians that we can compare with terrorists today, that in itself should raise a red flag that there's something weird about this, there's something odd about this comparison that we're making. In fact, the more you think about the comparison, the more it really seems to be saying that it's really hard to find poor examples of Christians. We have to go back 1,000 years to do that. But while we can find poor examples of Muslims right now, all over the world. And so the moral equivalency, while on the surface it looks good, it begins to erode when you dig down a little bit deeper into this argument. I don't know who said this this week, or I would give him or her credit, but I think they said it rather succinctly, at least from a political standpoint. They said, Mr. President, we have the medieval Christian crusade problem in hand. Let's get to work on the current Islam terrorist problem. And that, of course, brings forth this huge 1,000-year gap in the argument. Now, let's remember what the Crusades really were. And this is something that we need to be educated about as well. The Crusades started in the 1090s or so, and they were it was a military response to a militant Islam in the Middle East. If you want to know the details, you can Google it and read all you want, so I won't get into all of that. But I want you to remember the general picture. Muhammad lived around 600 AD. When he died, Islam began to expand rapidly outside of Arabia. Christianity also, in the first 100 years or so, expanded rapidly in the ancient Near Eastern world, 600 years before Muhammad. But Christianity rapidly expanded even though it was being harshly persecuted. Islam rapidly expanded for the first several hundred years of its existence, and it was the aggressor. Again, night and day, the comparison. For 400 years, between roughly 600 and 1,000 or 1,100, Islam worked its way up into Eastern Europe, all the way across North Africa and up into Spain, to where there were literally pinchers waiting to close in on Europe. And finally, after 400 years, Europeans woke up and said, we have a problem, and we're going to have to fight this problem, or we're going to lose our homeland. That was the Crusades. Some people have said that the Crusades was a late and weak response to a long and aggressive attack. And in some ways that's true. And I've said in here, and I'll give it to you, you have my permission to use it, and you can say you thought of it. I don't care. If you were to go into a college class that was teaching about World War II, and on the first day of the class they told you about the Enola Gay and about the attacks that the United States made against Japan in dropping the atomic bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and then you spent the rest of the semester talking about our attack on Japan, you should ask yourself what? Where's the rest of World War II? What about Pearl Harbor? What about all the battles in the South Pacific? And to talk about the Crusades without talking about what happened prior to that is equivalent to doing the same thing. We need the rest of the story. And there is more. There is more to the story. All groups, religions are misrepresented at times by some. And that's true. Some people misrepresent Islam, some people misrepresent Christianity. And so what we need to do to compare the two groups is to look at the leaders. Look at Muhammad. Look at Jesus. When the Jews rejected Muhammad, he went out and decapitated some 700 Jewish men, took their women and their children as spoils of war. When Jesus was rejected by the Jewish leaders, and the Roman leaders, by the way, he told Peter what? Put your sword down. And he went to a cross, and he gave his life as a ransom for the many. Now, there couldn't be a more stark difference between the two. And we need to, when we have the opportunity, we just need to calmly point that out so that people are not confused by this moral equivalency that groups are trying to make. Here's something else, one more point that I'd like to make about this before we move on. I would say that the argument the president is making is not really a religious argument. A lot of my friends tell me, well, I think the president he's a Muslim. He's in disguise and so forth. And probably many of you believe that. And my belief is that he's a secularist. I don't know where the man's heart is when it comes to his religion. I've never met him, and so I can't make that call. But based on a lot of his arguments, he makes the same kinds of arguments that secularists make. Secularists believe that all religion is dangerous. And so they typically make this moral equivalency argument. They say all religions are the same, they're all basically trying to achieve the same goals, and they're all equally dangerous because people with religious passions are the ones who have caused all of the degradation and the poverty and the wars throughout human history. And of course, there's a lot of truth to that. But what their goal is to marginalize all religion and to eventually get rid of all religion so that we have a secular state and then a secular world, where our politics are based not on the Bible or on any special revelation, but just on what they would say on science, on what most reasonable people can agree on. Now, here's the problem with that. I believe that secularists need to turn the light of truth that they're turning on religions on themselves. They have to go back 1,000 years to find Catholic European Christians who engaged in atrocities as they fought against Islam, although I would also say parenthetically that they simply fought war the way wars were fought back then, for whatever that's worth. Okay, let's put Christians out there and judge them. Let's put Muslims out there and judge them. Let's put the secularists out there and judge. Why do the secularists always get to judge all the religions and they're never judged? They go back 1,000 years to find atrocities carried out by some group of Christians. What would happen if we began to analyze how atheists have done historically? Do we have an example in history of atheists being in charge of a country? Was it 1,000 years ago? Very recent. Within the last 100 years, the best known secular atheist state turned on its own citizens so violently and wiped out so many millions of people that we don't know how many they are, and frankly made the violent religionists look like kindergartners in many ways. So, if we're going to turn the light of truth on Christianity, on Muslims, on other religions, then let's respectfully ask that that same light of truth be turned upon the secularists who are implying that the problem with humanity is religion, and if we could just get rid of religion, then all the violence would go away. Well, they tried to get rid of the religion in USSR, and the violence didn't go away, it got worse. It got worse. Violence is a problem with humanity. It's a serious problem. But it's not a religious problem. It's a human problem. Whether we have religion or not, there's going to be a problem with violence. The humanists have been telling us for quite some time now that we are evolving, and that eventually, given enough time, we will wipe out poverty. We will wipe out racism. We will wipe out war. And I always say, okay, let's look at history. Show me the historical evidence that we are getting, or we're making any progress at all at wiping out war. Have we had fewer wars in the last 100 years, or more wars? The 20th century is full of some of the most horrific conflicts that humanity has ever seen. There's no telling how many millions of lives were lost in the last 100 years as a result of war. Jesus, on the other hand, with absolute political incorrectness, when he was asked about the future, said, what about war? Before the end of time comes, there will be wars and rumors of wars. And nation will rise against nation, kingdom will rise against kingdom. Humanity will not solve the problem of war in this age. Now, I know that's politically incorrect, and I know it's negative thinking, and we're supposed to think positively and all of that, but let's just lay them out there. Humanists say that we're going to get rid of war. Jesus says we're not. Who are we going to listen to? I'm listening to Jesus. Because Jesus was able to predict 2,000 years ago that things aren't getting any better, and so I'm going to listen to his solution. And his solution is that we need to save our soul, because we're not going to be able to save this world. Now, hear me carefully. It doesn't mean that we give up on this world, nor the people in it. We help them as much as we possibly can. But the notion that Christianity is the problem is foolhardy. And the notion that Christianity and Islam are the same is also at best ignorant, and at worst it's deceptive. So you keep those things in mind. If you'd like to know those arguments, they'll be posted on my blog. They should be by now. Are they? They are. They're on my blog. I just put up a short article that I wrote yesterday as I was thinking about this week. I've heard this a lot, but this time it just hit me. It's like, this argument's not going away. It's persistent. And a lot of young people, especially who don't know these facts, are going to be swayed by this. And so you can help them out, particularly young people who don't know the facts. Say, sit down, let me talk to you for a minute. Let me fill you in on some of the things that are not being said publicly. Okay, back to feminism and Christianity. Unless you have anything that you'd like to add to that. Okay. Feminist critics approach the Bible with a hermeneutic of suspicion. Now, there's a wide variety of feminists. There are evangelical feminists. They do not approach the Bible with suspicion. But many other feminist groups do. In other words, they assume that the Bible is anti-woman, that it's dangerous for women, and that it's harmed women for thousands of years, and that we need to somehow or another get rid of the effects of the Bible. In Genesis chapter 34, we've been looking at the text that gives us the account of the rape of Dinah. And I won't read that again. We've already been through it a couple of times in here. Let me just recap the story for you so that you have the salient parts in mind again. Dinah goes out in a town called Shechem, and she's raped by a young man named Shechem. After he rapes her, he loves her and he wants to marry her, and so he and his father go and speak to Dinah's dad, Jacob, and his brothers. Jacob, for some reason, is silent and passive. The brothers, when they hear that Dinah's rapist wants to marry their sister, they come up with a deceptive plan whereby the Shechemites must circumcise all their males. And they agree to do so, and while they're recovering, the brothers come to the town and wipe out all the men in the town violently, take the women and the children as spoils of war. And Jacob finally opens his mouth at the very end and tells them, "What have you done to me? Everybody's going to be mad at me now. They're going to wipe my family out because we're a small family." And the brothers respond by saying, should he have treated our, or should they have treated our sister as a prostitute? And then there's a stark ending to that text. Now, last week, I pointed out to you that some commentators actually blame Dinah for what happened. And I said that the text never does that. It always blames Shechem. Dinah is never blamed for the rape, but it doesn't give her a voice. And that bothers feminists. Why do we never hear from Dinah in Genesis chapter 34? Why is she silent? Is she being dehumanized since she's not given a voice in all of this that's happening? And so the first question on your outline was, why does the narrator deny Dinah a voice? And I pointed out that, first of all, the narrator doesn't blame Dinah. And in other texts in the Bible where women are raped, they are given a voice. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, where Tamar is raped, in fact, she has a lot to say about her rape. And so to say that the Bible generally dehumanizes women by not allowing them a voice in this violent attack against them, rape, is simply incorrect. The question then becomes, well, why is Dinah not given a voice when Tamar is? And the answer to that is, in part, the next part of number 1 on your outline, biblical narratives are written to reveal God's person and plan, not to provide a platform for gender politics or any other politics, frankly. So when we come to the Bible, as feminists do, and other groups like liberation theologists or whatever, when we come to the Bible expecting the Bible to support some political position, we're always going to have to reject large parts of the text because the Bible's not there to support anybody's political position. It's there to reveal God's person and plan. If we keep that in mind when we come to the Bible, then the Bible will make more sense. It's not about giving Dinah a voice. It's about giving God a voice. And if Dinah needs to speak for us to understand God, she will. If she doesn't, she won't. If Tamar needs to speak for us to understand something about God, she will. If she doesn't, then she won't. Now, you understand when I say that, it doesn't mean that God silenced Dinah. Dinah surely said some things. It's just that they're not recorded. What we're saying is that the narrator didn't give Dinah a voice, and he did give Tamar a voice. The notion that a God's eye view is neutral somehow is wrong. God's perspective is not neutral. God's perspective is pro-God. And he tells the story not in a way that's supposed to be fair or neutral. He tells the story in a way that reveals him. And when we get that, then we understand something very important about how we approach the Bible. It's not about being fair. It's not about being neutral. It's about us learning who God is. And when God is selective in telling stories, he does so in a proper manner. He does so in a way that we get something out of it. The next thing was we looked at the fact that Shechem negotiated with the brothers for Dinah. It sort of seemed like she was a piece of property. And this is kind of where we ended last time. That she was like an animal almost. That they were talking about prices and what was going to happen to her future, and she never said a word. But we find out later on that she wasn't even there when that happened. She was being held captive, apparently, in Shechem's house. So one of the reasons that she's silent in all these negotiations is she's absent. But she may have been silent anyway, had she been there, because the men typically took over in these situations. Does that mean, number 2 on your outline, is Dinah being treated as a possession instead of a person? Does that mean that they see her as an object rather than as an individual? Well, money always changed hands in marriages back then. I think we ended up with the idea that we might not be quite as different from them as we think, because we have financial indicators of love in our culture too. This might have been a kind of an upsetting way to end the discussion, but I brought up what? Wedding rings. And I asked the ladies, I said, do ladies kind of like to show off their wedding rings as sort of a measure of what their husband thinks about them in economic terms? And we'll rush past that because I think that might have been an upsetting way to think about it. But sometimes we're not as different from these cultures as we like to think we are. We look down on them and say, gosh, they're treating a woman as an object and putting a price on her. Maybe we do the same thing in different ways Nevertheless, their culture seems strange to us, and some commentators say that when the brothers say it's a disgrace to us, they only mean the men in the family, but there's no way to know that. How do we know that they didn't mean a disgrace to us, our family, including Dinah? Yes, ma'am?
Well, I was just kind of thinking about something you said. I didn't think about it last week, but if she was being held, maybe the whole thing of negotiation was just a ruse to get her back. You know, maybe.
It was. You're absolutely right. The whole negotiation was a ruse to get her back.
You know,
and so the brothers weren't even being honest in the negotiation.
Maybe it wasn't. I know last week I was like, they only cared about them, and they were ashamed because their sister was ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, maybe the whole idea was, hey, we just got to get her back. And the only way we can't just say, no, you can't have her, give her back, because he might not give her back. But if we pretend, then, you know, we can go in and rescue her.
The feminists who don't like the Bible would respond to that, Tammy, by saying, yes, they did want her back, but they didn't want her back because they cared about her. They wanted her back because it made them look bad. But is it either or? Is it possible that that both were true? That it did make them look bad, and they felt bad because they lost their sister, but they also cared about their sister. We can't look at this text and say absolutely for sure one way or the other whether or not they had genuine feelings for their sister. I would say that their anger over what happened indicates that they had genuine feelings for their sister. The feminists would say, no, it's just they just were upset about what happened to them and really didn't care about their sister. But I would put the burden of proof on them and say, well, prove that. How can you prove that these brothers didn't care about their sister? What man who has a sister and found out that his sister had been raped and carried away wouldn't have a passionate response to that?
Their last statement was not, we can't let them shame us. It was, we can't let them treat her as a harlot.
Exactly right. In verse 31, the whole thing ends with that she was treated like a prostitute. And then I pointed out to you a wonderful book in the Bible, Ruth, the story of Ruth and Boaz and Naomi, which is told through the perspective of women. And it shows that these relationships, the way that they did relationships in the ancient world, although they seem strange to us, they were meant to protect women. And Boaz is a protector of Ruth. And I think anyone could read this story with Boaz and Ruth and Naomi and say that this is a beautiful story. This is a love story. And it doesn't denigrate anybody. It doesn't denigrate women or put them down or make them out to be second-class citizens. In fact, the person who is in charge of what happens in that book is whom? Naomi. It's a woman. She is guiding everything that happens and making sure that it all comes together the way that it should. And so it's entirely from the perspective of a woman, and it shows that a woman could wield a lot of power and influence even in their so-called patriarchal society. So then we wrote down this: God expects men to protect women, not to possess them. Church, God chose to give women the womb. You can argue with that all you want to, but that's just the way it is. And when a woman makes herself vulnerable enough to come to a man and say, I am going to become your mate, and I am going to bear your children, which means that my body is going to change dramatically. And it may not change back ever again. And I am trusting you to love me while my body has changed, and even though it may not ever change back. I am trusting you to protect me while I'm carrying that baby inside me. Because while that baby is in me, my body is all out of whack. And I am vulnerable. Now, we may not see that as much in our culture because we live in a safe society. But much of the world doesn't, even today. And they certainly didn't. When a woman was carrying around a baby in the third trimester, she couldn't run away from the enemy. If somebody wanted to destroy her, what did she need? She needed a protector. Somebody who would watch out for her while she has voluntarily made herself weak to bear his children. Now, you can say you don't like that setup, and a lot of feminists don't. Frankly, my personal opinion is that feminists just despise their own wounds. Now, you can get mad at me if you want to. I'm talking about the radical kind, not the evangelical kind. I just make peace with who God made us to be. Men were made to protect. Women were made to bear the babies, raise them up. Now, when a woman has raised her kids, she reaches a wonderful time of life, and you ladies, as you finish raising your kids, I want you to know I've got my eyeballs on you. Oh my goodness. You enter into one of the most productive times of life. I love it. I love it. Because you can do amazing things in ministry once you've got those kids. Right? Just look around at this church. I don't have to name names. Look around at the women whose children have grown up and what they're doing in this church. They carry a heavy load, and they do a great job. So a woman's life is about seasons. Men's lives are too, but it just seems more obvious with a woman. There's a season for raising babies and having a family. And a lot of women want to confuse the seasons. They want that season of productivity professionally to be happening at the same time that they're having the season of raising the babies. And our culture has told them that they can do it. And so a lot of women are trying desperately to do it. But isn't it more natural to say that there's a season for raising the babies and having a man there who is protecting me and providing for me and for our children and helping me raise those kids and recognizing that his job isn't the thing that matters most. It's our job together in the home raising these kids that matters most. And then once they're raised and they don't require as much time, now I can look around. I'm still young enough. I'm still healthy enough. I've learned a lot of things. I'm ready to put my hands into something else. That's a new season in life, and it's an exciting season. Well, anyway, why not just accept what God's given us and make the most out of it? Does the Bible, number 3, promote male-dominated culture? It's true that the cultures in the Bible were patriarchal, or at least it appeared as if the men ran everything. Now, I would make a case to you that that is an appearance that's not always true. Let's go back to Abraham's household for just a moment. Remember Abraham and Sarah? No baby, no baby. God told us we're going to have a baby. No baby. We're getting upset. Time's going by. Sarah's upset. So she finally tells Abraham what? Here's Hagar, give me a baby. Then, after Hagar has a baby, then what? You ladies just change your mind. And she goes to Abraham and she says, what? Abraham says, no way, I'm in charge of this family. Woman, you sit down and be quiet. Abraham didn't have that bruise on his head. What did he do? Yes, honey. It took God. It took God to say, let her back in. But even then, once Ishmael was old enough, then Sarah again said what? She's out of here. And Abraham loved Ishmael. That was his son. It was for his firstborn son. And he agonized over that, but he did what? Now you tell me who's in charge of that family. I'm not trying to pull Abraham down. He's a great man. But is it true to just simply say that that was a patriarchal society and the man made all the decisions? Absolutely not. Absolutely. Did women just have to do whatever they were told to do? Remember when Abraham sent his servant out to find a wife for his son, and he went to the where they drew water, and who comes running out? Rebecca. And she's gorgeous. And his prayers are answered, and he says, this is the woman. And he goes and talks to the families and explains the whole thing. And they do what? They ask Rebecca. will you go with this man? Now you can make the argument that they were hoping that she would say no, that she wouldn't go, but the bottom line is they gave her what? They gave her veto power. And it appears from evidence from the ancient Near Eastern world that although a lot of these marriages were put together by the parents and so forth, some of them even when the bride and groom were children, that there was still veto power, that women could still say no. So it may not be as simple as it appears on the surface. Hey, those of us that are married, let's face it. Do we project our relationship to the public exactly the way that it is at home? Everybody's scared to answer that question. You should have seen the fright on the looks of a lot of people's faces. Should we? Are we being dishonest if there are secret things that happen at home in our relationship that we don't divulge publicly? There are some things that are just private, absolutely. You don't need to know how Karen and I make all our decisions, do you? And I don't need to know how George and Judy make all their decisions. It's none of my business. Jack?
But you gotta say, though, in the ancient world, it's a strictly male-dominated society. Look at the temple. Okay, the court is the temple, the court of the Gentiles, the court of women, and then the men were allowed.
And that's, Jack's pointing out, in the temple there was the court of the Gentiles, then the court of the women, and then the court of the men, and then the court of the priests, and then the temple itself. And so it looks like the men are in the center, but that's my point. It looks like the men are in the center. But what happened when those men went home and dealt with their wives? It was still a patriarchal society, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that it may not be as simple. When you read the Bible carefully, you see that women have wielded power at times.
He didn't say no to that.
He did not say no. He was probably a wise man. So here's number 3. Does the Bible promote male-dominated culture? Look at, keep your finger in Genesis 34 if you've got it there, but turn back to Genesis 3 for just a moment. Genesis 3 and verse 16. This is a very important verse for the relationship between men and women in this age. You know the story. It's the story of the fall. And this is the part where God is pronouncing judgments. And in verse 16, to the woman he said, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain we'll give birth to children. By the way, there's 2 levels of meaning to that. There's the physical pain of childbirth itself, but there's also the pain in this age of raising children. Ladies who have raised kids, was that the end of the pain when you gave birth to the kids? Might you look back now and say that was the easy part? Compared to dealing with them as a teenager, as an adult. Since a child comes from a woman's body, you know, you can, for those of you who do not despise your women, who see it as a blessing, you are given a bond with another human being that is absolutely unique, that a man will never experience. Just no way. We'll never know that. We'll never know what it means to have had another human being inside us. And to remember the day that that little boy or girl came out and you held that person and thought about the fact that that person is part of you in a way that men can't understand. And so for the rest of your life, when you look even at your grown children, can't you still see that face of a little boy or a little girl? When you look at your grown children, can't you still see the face of that infant that you held in your hands when you were lying there in bed? And there's something about that bond and that love that creates pain in this age. Because when they hurt, you hurt. And God's saying here, things are going to be broken in this world, and this love that is so special between a mother and a child is also going to suffer because of the fall. It's going to be a harder relationship. There's going to be some deep hurts in that relationship. But that's not all. Look what he says next. He says, your desire will be for your husband, and he will what? This is the first mention in the Bible of a man ruling over a woman. There's no mention of a man ruling over a woman in Genesis chapter 1. In fact, in Genesis chapter 1, God says, I'm going to create you male and female. And then he says, and then you will what? Why did he make us? Two things. Be fruitful and multiply, and rule dominion over the earth. And that's not to the men. That was to both. The two of you, here's what I want you to do. I want you to have babies, and I want you to rule the earth together. In Genesis chapter 2, no mention. I know it says help meet, but please don't let that bother you. Guess who else is a helpmeet in the Bible? Anybody know?
Holy Spirit.
Same, what's that?
Holy Spirit.
Close. I'll take that. Same word, used more than once. A helpmeet for man is God. God is not placing himself below man by saying he's a helpmeet for man, and he's not placing women below man by saying she is a helpmeet. We complement and complete one another. The first mention ever of a man being over a woman is here. After what? The fall. The rule of men over women is a result of what? Not God's design. It's a result of sin. And I want you to see that it affects women too. They have this desire, apparently, for their husband. It's so vague, it's hard to tell exactly what he means by that. But right here in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 is the beginning of the battle of the sexes. Right there. Bang. It started and it's been going on ever since. And here we are, fighting it out. We're supposed to be different as believers because in Christ there is no what? Male and female. We're part of the new creation. The new creation is breaking into the old creation through us. And so we're to display to the world a new understanding of the relationship between men and women. Oh, let me correct myself, an ancient understanding of the relationship between men and women. One that goes back before Genesis chapter 3, back to Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 1, where he said, we'll make man, in our image we'll make him, singular, singular, male and female, we will make him, singular. Together we're humanity. Even the pronouns show the togetherness of what God's talking about. So, on your outline, the Bible ascribes the battle between the sexes to sin. There's just another example of sin. War, poverty, racism, hatred, selfishness, the battle between the sexes. It's all sin. Our land is littered with sin. When we begin to realize what sin really is, we start to see what God sees when he looks at this world. Just how broken this world really is. It is absolutely, top to bottom, inside and out, upside and down, it's broken. Even the beauty of what God has given us is twisted and broken because of sin. And it includes the relationship between men and women. All right, let's see if we can't do one other thing here real quick before we stop. Go back to Genesis 34 and verse 13. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. Jacob's, their sister. Now, feminists like to point out the fact that Dinah, they say, is always identified as by her relationship to men. She's their brother. She's his father. And so, again, she's marginalized, she's dehumanized, she's objectified, she is put down. She has no identity of her own apart from the men in her life, the feminist would say. Is that true? Is that true? The fact is that also in this text, the men are called Dinah's brothers. Jacob is Dinah's father. And so the feminists who use that, this is such a weak argument. They're hoping that those who are listening won't even read the text, apparently. Because even in this text right here, it goes both ways. Everyone was seen as part of the family unit. And I've heard this recently by feminists, that they despise the fact that women are always given their identity through their family relationships. Well, hey, wait a minute. I don't have a problem with being identified through my family relationships, do you? We believe that our relationships are important. And the fact is, they do make us who we are, not just women, but men as well. Notice it says Jacob's sons. So his sons also drew their identity from their father, and they drew their identities from one another. In fact, all through the Bible, men are called what? Their name, what? Son of somebody else. So the Bible just sees the family relationships as being critical to our understanding of who we are as people. And radical feminists are just saying that they don't value those family relationships. They're the ones who are telling women, you have no value unless you're out there in the professional world. That if all you do is have relationships in the home with children and your husband, then you're a nobody. Well, they're wrong. They're wrong about that. In fact, you're getting your identity from the very place that the Bible says we should get identity from. We get it first from whom? From God. And secondly, we get it from other people. We don't get our identity from being an individual or from being a professional. Have you ever stopped and thought how few times people in the Bible are given an identity based on their profession or what they do or what they accomplish? Even Noah, who built the ark, his identity is not so much the ark builder. His identity is what? He's the preacher of righteousness. We think of him as the ark builder because that's just the way we think. We think about what people do. When you meet somebody new at a party, what's the first question everybody asks? What do you do? What do you do? Well, they wouldn't do that in the ancient Near Eastern world. When two Jews met each other walking along, the first question they would ask is what? That's right. Who's your tribe? What tribe do you come from? What's that? Who's your dad? That's exactly right. Because they valued relationships. It's not that they didn't care about their professions. It's not that they didn't want to do things. It's not that women didn't do anything professionally. Read Proverbs 31 for crying out loud. That woman is so busy she'll make you tired just reading about it. And she was a professional woman. She was in that season. Feminists are just wrong. The relationship that matters the most is our relationship with one another. And what we do professionally, in many ways, is it's secondary. So number 4, is Dinah's identity limited to a relation to men? Absolutely not. Verse 25, just so you can see it, they're called Dinah's brothers. And so they get their relationship from her. They get their identity from her. Her brothers do. And in verse 27, they're called the sons of Jacob. And not only that, this whole episode begins with Dinah getting her identity from whom? Look at the very top, verse 1 and 2. The daughter of Leah. This whole thing begins with Dinah getting her identity not from any man at all, but from a woman, her mother. Now, there's a reason for that. This is not making a statement about gender issues. It's making a statement about the divisions that were in this family. The narrator, by putting the fact that Leah was the mother of Dinah at the beginning of this narrative, is showing us something about this family that we're about to see when we talk about Joseph starting next Sunday morning, that this is a very divided family. And he's implying that the reason that Jacob was silent about the Dinah episode is that she was the daughter of the ugly wife. Remember? He was forced to marry her, and he resented it. Am I using I love using politically incorrect words, though, Jack. I know. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Apparently Jacob thought she was ugly, though.
He didn't think she was as pretty.
Well, you're so positive.
She had beautiful eyes.
That's right.
Thank you. You're right. She had beautiful eyes. Okay. But apparently when she took that other thing, well, anyway. I'm sorry, Leah. But the point is here, the narrator is not telling us that Dinah is Leah's daughter because he wants to make a feminist statement. He's telling us that because it's a clue about why Jacob reacted the way that he did. No matter how Leah looked, Jacob still resented the fact that he had to marry her. Because the one he wanted to marry was Rachel. Okay? Put her looks aside. He resented that. And we're going to see that in the story of Joseph. It's going to come out just plain as day. That he had a hard time playing favorites in his family. So let's finish number 4 and we're done for tonight. Dinah's relation to her family is important. It's important in reality and it's important to the narrator. Which includes not just the men in her family, but the women in her family. Her relationship, her identity came not just from the men, but from the women, from her mom, and the men's relation to her. She was a woman in her own right. She's called Dinah. And the brothers are called her brothers. So this goes both ways. That argument, we can just shove that aside. Because there's plenty of evidence that it goes both ways. And what's really happening is the Bible is showing us that family relationships are important. They matter. They're a priority. All right, we've still got a couple of other things to look at on this one. So God willing, we'll finish it up next Sunday night. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your attention and your patience as always. And enjoy our time together on Sunday night. Let's pray and then we'll sing a song and be dismissed. Father, we praise you tonight and thank you